I was asked to speak about advances in AI and their impact on patient care. And title of the talk is called Reclaiming Voice with AI. It's actually based on an article we recently published in the New England Journal of Medicine, AI, NEJM AI, of the same name. Before I get there, I just want to briefly recap how I got here, and I won't belabor this because at this point, many of the speakers have already reviewed this, that ChatGPT at this point is ubiquitous. According to Gallup polling, about 99% of Americans are using artificial intelligence, and currently ChatGPT is the sixth most visited website on the internet right now. Our group was among the first to benchmark the efficacy of these models on neurosurgery written board exams using official ABNS questions that were released on the SANS platform by the CNS, showing that GPT-4 could perform a passing level in that examination. We followed that up with a study comparing it to what was then Google's leading LLM, finding that GPT-4 bested what was then seen as the incumbent in the AI space. And some of our work in that paper actually was heavily influential in the AI and computer science community because we were among the first to quantify the rates of hallucination for large language models, finding that in some instances, over 50% of the time, LLMs, Google's model at the time, was confabulating imaging information that it could not see. It was a pretty viral finding that was covered by over 60 media outlets because all of a sudden, we're talking about medicine, we're talking about AI, and we're talking about hallucinations. It understandably caused a lot of concern amongst the public. And so what other shortcomings exist for generative AI? Well, our group studied this in a slightly different angle. We looked at generative AI for text-to-image generators. As I'm sure by now all of you are aware that you can put in some text on the internet on some of these text-to-image generators and it can generate lifelike images. We asked, what do these AI tools think that surgeons look like? And so we said to the AI tools, generate the face of a neurosurgeon, general surgeon, orthopedic surgeon, across 12 different types of surgeons. And what we found was quite striking. For two of the leading models at the time, despite being able to generate lifelike images of surgeons and faces across nearly 2,000 images, generated 0 images of females or people of color, despite, as we know, women represent 10% of the surgical workforce in neurosurgery and nearly 30% of the trainees. And so we published this finding in JAMA Surgery. It was picked up by a number of media outlets. And I think the point here is not that no one's worried that these text-to-image models are going to generate biased representations of surgeons, but it's just a reflection of the process of creating these models, right? That it's really difficult to strip away the bias in the training data, the bias and leanings of those who create these models. And so with that in mind, what have we learned? We learned, well, AI can encode sizable medical knowledge, but we have this problem with hallucinations, which, by the way, is still a problem, has not been solved yet, and there's outputs that are biased by the training data and the algorithms. So we published this letter in Neurosurgery, essentially saying that neurosurgery leadership in the era of generative artificial intelligence requires a clinician in the loop. And so what are examples of projects that, given the capabilities of AI tools, could be beneficial for patient care? So the first one we looked at is using AI to facilitate informed medical consent. As we all know, informed consent is the cornerstone of medical ethics as outlined in the Belmont Report published in 1974. But we also know that surgical consent forms are really any patient literature that we face in the healthcare system. If you've ever been a patient, you know this. You've been handed a form that's 3 pages, size 8 font and dense, and you don't even bother to read it, right? And this study, going back to 1980, published in the New England Journal of Medicine, found that most surgical consent forms are written at the college level. Other industries, for example, including the military, have figured out that this is a problem. So back in the Vietnam War, when they lowered the IQ requirements for soldiers enlisting in the war, they found that those soldiers in particular had a higher rate battlefield injuries and death. And so it was actually introduced into the military technical standard that all technical manuals be written at an accessible reading level, the average American reading level being about the 6th to the 8th grade. So that became a US military standard. Unfortunately, in medicine, we have not yeah, adopted that same spirit. And so we published this last fall in the Lancet's eClinical Medicine, the literacy barrier in clinical trial consent, a retrospective analysis. We went back over 2 decades of clinical trial consent forms. These are publicly accessible clinical trial consent forms found on clinicaltrials.gov, and we evaluated the reading level of these clinical trial consent forms. So there are federal statutes out there that say all federally funded clinical trials need to have a consent form that's written at an accessible reading level, but we found that's emphatically not the case. We find that despite 54% of Americans not reading at a 6th grade reading level, these clinical trial consent forms across a variety of different study types are written at the college or upper high school reading level. And what even more concerning, we did a mixed effects analysis and examined, we had the theory that the higher the reading level of these consent forms, well, that's probably going to lead to less engagement in the clinical trials. And in fact, we did find that to be the case. For every grade level increase in the clinical trial consent form reading complexity, we found that there was about 16% increase in the clinical trial dropout rate, which has implications on the accuracy of research. So returning to surgical consent forms, we wanted to see how widespread this problem was, and so we kind of crowdsourced 15 consent forms from across the country at 15 different academic medical centers, and we found that, unsurprisingly, that those were indeed written at about the level of a college sophomore on average. And so this is where ChatGPT came in with a simple prompt: while preserving content and meaning, convert this consent form to the average American reading level. We found that this is actually a very, a strength of these LLMs, is that they have this language transferability, and they're able to readily simplify language. We found we were able to simplify the language of these consent forms from that at a college level to that of a middle schooler. We had a human in the loop in this process, in this case surgeons and also medical malpractice attorneys, review it and found that the content was retained, published it in Nature's NPJ Digital Medicine last year in March. But then we went a step further and we asked, could we implement this in real life? And we implemented it at our own healthcare system, and I'm proud to say that for over a year now, we've had this implemented as a standard surgical consent form at our healthcare system, and the initiative has spread now to be encompassing the patient intake form, the radiation oncology consent form, the chemotherapy consent form, and many others have all been written out at an accessible reading level at our healthcare system. And this again, struck a chord. We were invited to present our work at the NIH, at the United Nations General Assembly meeting last September, and we published our findings in England Journal of Medicine AI in a paper that was recently honored by the editor-in-chief to be the best of the year, and we also discussed it in podcast format on their podcast. And because of all this work, we got the attention of OpenAI, and that kind of started a series of academic conversations about what we could be doing with frontier AI technologies that could benefit patients. And that brings me back to the title of my talk, Reclaiming Voice with AI. So as many of you know, voice disorders are a very common issue in the population. I think every physician has someone in their practice, of course every neurosurgeon, but about 18 million adults have problems with their voice in the past year. 5% of children have a speech disorder, and about 2 million people in the United States currently have aphasia. And these include patients like Lexi Bogan. She's a 21-year-old with angioblastoma. She presented with 6 months of headache, dizziness, nausea, facial tingling, and blurry vision. She underwent a suboccipital craniectomy, and she had a period of time of dysarthria postoperatively, and that was very debilitating to her. She had a difficult time doing simple things like ordering food at a drive-thru, or attending college lectures with confidence, or even sometimes speaking to family or friends. And so we were granted early access to this model, and the question was, could this be helpful in medicine? And so we immediately our minds turned to Lexi Bogan, and we designed a bespoke app for her through this technology OpenAI was about to release called Voice Engine. It can take 15 seconds of recorded audio and essentially with that 15 seconds recapitulate a voice. We were able to download a bespoke iPhone app for her utilizing Voice Engine. And so in speaking with her, we realized she had actually a 15-second clip of recorded audio from her from a high school project she had done just a year or so prior. And so this is what it looked like in practice. So this was the high school video project prior to the surgery.
When you have all of your ingredients together, you are going to put the chopped broccoli and chopped banana peppers inside the bowl. And now this is very adverse. You can use anything that you would like. If you want to use cucumbers, you can chop up cucumbers and put this in here.
This is what our voice sounds like with voice engine. So taking just those 15 seconds, what does it sound like?
Hi everyone, this is what my voice sounds like using OpenAI's new text-to-speech model called Voice Engine. I was able to use just 15 seconds of a video that I made for a class project to be the reference audio source for the voice you hear right now. What do you think?
This is what voice sounded like at the time.
Hi everyone, this is what my voice sounds like using OpenAI new text-to-speech model called Voice Engine. I was able to use this 15 seconds of a video I made for a class project to be a reference audio source for the voice you hear right now. What do you think?
And again, going back to the AI app, this is what it sounds like when she's ordering something in a drive-thru.
Can I please have a #1 with large fries and with a strawberry shake?
So we published this, like I said, last November in NEJ AI, and we included Lexi as one of the co-authors. And in it, we basically argue there are a lot of concerns, and they're very legitimate concerns about AI in society, but including for tools like AI voice cloning. And there's obviously significant potential for abuse for technologies like this. But as I think clinicians, we have to be in the corner of the patients and realize that some of these technologies may be very life-changing for patients and really empower them in ways that they otherwise would not be able to be empowered. And I think we need to, as a society, balance the pros and cons about mitigating the release of these technologies due to sometimes abstract or theoretical concerns about safety with the very real benefit that some of these technologies may provide to patients like this one. So with that, thank you.